Every day, you essentially pay your dues by doing the harder thing when it's the right thing to do.
In the world, in other pro sports, so baseball, football, particularly a lot of golfers, stuff like that. And they have helped me in the last 10 years learn the benefits of maybe the other side of the coin, which is a more science-based weight training mixture built for gymnasts. And this is something that like I said, I firmly believe will become, the gold standard for the next, 5 years, from the college level all the way down to the club level. And I know there's a range of people in here in this chat, from people who are very advanced with their gymnasts doing both lifting and non-lifting and body weight. And then there's some people who are maybe in the middle where they're kind of involved, but the strength conditioning staff and them maybe don't see eye to eye, and they're not really sure how to do it. They're nervous about either the girls getting hurt or putting too much load on them. They don't know what exercise to do because maybe a GA student or a strength coach doesn't understand gymnastics, and they're trying, but it's not, you're zigging and one person's zagging. And then on the other side, I know I've talked to some people who are like, you know what, I finally believe in maybe doing something a little bit differently, and I would love to get involved. Please help. So I understand there's a variety of people here. So I want to start by just saying that I understand we're all coming from different points of view. And I understand that this topic is very new and it's very overwhelming for people who maybe grew up like myself in the traditional model, which was just what my coach did and a variety of bodyweight stuff, rope climbs, handstands, all that. So I want to make sure with this lecture that I go slow. I have a tendency to talk very fast when I get excited about stuff, so I'll try to slow down. But I'm going to really take my time with this lecture and with the next lecture next week and try to go really closely through the slides and make sure we understand the concepts, because I firmly believe, like I said, with all of my heart, that if we can embrace this hybrid model, you will see enormous increases in performance in terms of speed, power, all of the things we want out of gymnastics, but we will also see a massive reduction in injuries. And I really believe that. There's nothing that I have found that I feel, though, is such a low-hanging fruit to make both performance go up and injury risk go down, which is like a really good, solid strength conditioning hybrid model. So I think it's really important. There's many people in the NCAA who I'm really grateful and fortunate to consult with, and I've seen what works in their programs. I also work with hundreds of gymnasts per month, as many people may know, online or at our facility in Boston. And in Boston, where I work, we're really lucky to have an expert strength and conditioning staff that works with pro baseball players, works with professional football players, and all of the gymnasts, the college gymnasts that we work with, come to us in the summer. And we've been able to see people over the course of, in some cases, 5 to 7 years, and have really good data and metrics behind what works, what doesn't work, and what maybe is coming down the road. So that's my little intro, is that I'm grateful to be here. I'm extremely humbled that people want me to come back and talk about this stuff, but I really want to go slow. So I'll probably honestly take a full 45 minutes to an hour, and then I will stick around and answer any question that anybody has for as long as I need to. You can email me after, because I want you to be successful and I want you to feel as though you know what's happening here. So don't worry about asking questions. All right. So this is going to be all about how to increase explosive power, right? Because that's kind of what we're all going through with hybrid models. We're going to talk about, in the first one here, background concepts and how to look at the competitive year. We're going to talk about yearly planning templates of what the periodization model that I have seen work really well is. We have strength conditioning templates that we use at Champion for all of our college gymnasts that we find really, really successful. Kylie, you guys will see her a lot. She'll be the star of the show. She is a college gymnast that I have worked with for the last 8 years on the medical side. And she has been lifting with us for about 4 or 5 years. And she's a really good case study of what has been going well for her. I'll give you guys the practice planning templates and the exercise cheat sheets for different like squats, exercises, all that. And then if you want a really good application of this, so Nick Ruddick, you guys may know, is an elite coach in the UK, and he consults with many federations. Him and I and Dan Lonsdale, who's a great strength and conditioning coach, kind of did a 2-hour-long podcast, which was like, how do we build this program from scratch, and why are we picking these exercises, doing them when? So we talk about how we blend the gymnastic stuff with the traditional stuff. So I'll give you everything, but if you want to go back and see one built live, you can watch that. And then next week, we'll talk more about the nuts and bolts of what do I put in a program, how many sets, how many reps, all that kind of stuff. All right. But just some background stuff is going to be really important here. So the goal with these 2 lectures and beyond is to hopefully take the 10 years of stuff that I've learned from coaching and medical and the strength conditioning world and smush it into 2 lectures and give you just what you need to do to be successful. Okay. I want to tell you what has really been working and what has not been working. And then a lot of the mistakes I made along the way so that you guys don't have to deal with those headaches. Okay. And then lastly, I'd like to give you my exact kind of cookbook as it stands right now for what I'm doing with athletes that consulting work or at the clinic that we work at, based on all of my experiences, right? I'm so incredibly grateful and fortunate that people value my opinion enough to ask me to look in their programs and look at their strength programs and stuff. So I've looked at a lot of the college programs that are of people in here, and we've talked and worked together. I'm grateful for that. But I've also looked at a lot of elite programs, and I've looked at a lot of international programs as well. And what I like about that is it gives me a bird's eye view of what people are doing and what the trends are. Obviously, I don't know your athletes as well as you do, so it's going to be based on your application. But it gives me a really good perspective to say like, hey, most of the people are doing this exercise, or they're doing this many weeks of this cycle or something like that. So the hope is that we can get there and share a lot of this information with people. Okay, part 1 this week, the why of how you actually build explosive power. What is the basic science of that? There's a lot of myths still floating around in gymnastics culture, particularly at the club level, about what happens when a gymnast lifts weights. So I want to kind of get those out of the way and then just end tonight with talking about how to look at the competitive year and plan. It's really important to start from the off season and in the summer if you want to be successful at whatever regionals or championships or whatever your individual championship is. It's really important you start early and that you start from the very beginning with a really solid foundation, because if not, it's really hard to pick up lost ground in the preseason and in the in-season. So we'll do that this week. And then next week, after we let people marinate on a little bit and kind of process that, we'll talk about the nuts and the bolts, like I said, of how we actually do this, how many sets, how many reps, what are we doing in the preseason, what are we doing in the off season, all that, and then kind of share you guys some more plans of examples and stuff like that. So I know people in here probably think that I'm a medical provider primarily and that I really only care about injuries. Obviously, that's really important to reduce injuries and have the athletes be healthy. That's always my number 1 priority. But I come from a traditional collegiate gymnastics background and club and coaching. I love seeing people be successful. I love watching all of you guys compete each weekend. I watch all of the meets I possibly can. And there's nothing better than watching, a team be in rhythm and hit routine after routine and people are exploding and going, so excited. Like I love it. I love college gymnastics for that reason. So while we will talk about, the injury side, I really want you guys to understand this is one from a performance priority first. I want you guys to have the tools to get bigger skills, longevity in the athletes from more training load, and have them be able to train harder and smarter, not just, obviously injuries matter, but I want you to understand that I'm coming to a point of coaching really first. So the good news is that when you look at the research, those things go hand in hand, right? So the same kind of ideas that we're talking about that will increase, explosive power for bigger skills or bigger bar releases, whatever, those things are also supportive to reduce the risk of injuries. And we'll talk about obviously some specific ones. Obviously the Achilles injury situation happening right now and the ACL situation is very, very prominent. And when you look at that research, you see that strength and conditioning is one of our best ways to reduce the risk of those things. All right. So let's just start with this. Let's get a basic understanding of what is power, right? Power is really the central thing we all want out of gymnastics. We want bigger tumbling, bigger vaults. We want, more explosive releases. We want someone to get through routines and cardio capacity and all that. So what is this basic power? And I'm putting these things in very layman's terms. I want to make sure we're not going too geeky down the physiological rabbit hole because we'll lose people. But power essentially is a product of force over time, right? There are many different explanations and distance or velocity vectors you could talk about or impulses, but just take it right now for this grain of salt is that power is very much a product of force over time. So if you want to increase your power, you have to either increase the amount of force you can produce or reduce the time in which you share that force, right? So if you can put more, force into the floor and you can be stiffer and you can have a quicker snap into the ground and get off, you can probably have more power into your actual tumbling pass takeoff. Okay, if we put more energy into the equipment and you also have really great gymnastics technique, that is how you have more force coming out of the equipment, right? Think about a high bar release before a dismount. If you have a very aggressive, strong tap and you're strong enough to tap hard to the bottom and you have great technique and you understand where to let go and all that, you're going to have more recoil of the bar to have more flight time to get a double layout around or half and half out. Same thing on floor. If you tumble efficiently and you're strong and you can snap hard into the ground with good shaping and you can tune the floor well and be tight, that will show up as the springs absorbing and then not as much energy is lost and it sends you higher into the ground, into the air, right? All of the equipment is trying to help you if you're strong enough and you have great technique to support it. So with that in mind, okay, what are we going to do to change those equation pieces? Well, how do we increase force, right? Well, one is you increase muscle strength. I think a lot of people understand that, right? If you want to be strong, if you're stronger, you can put more force into the bar, into the floor, off the table, you can block, right? Or if you're stronger, you won't lose energy when your shoulders collapse. You're less resistant to buckling, right? Or blocking, kind of caving in on you. So two is that you can increase the coordination of muscles working together. And that's a lot of what strength and conditioning does, is sometimes it does truly make you stronger, but it also sometimes helps different groups of muscles work together at the same time. So when you do a good squat loading pattern, or you do some power work, right, you can help teach the motor units, the basic units of your quads, right, the muscles, to work together and fire at the same time. And when they all fire together, if they're bigger areas of the muscles work together at a faster rate, they're obviously going to put more power out. So hopefully that makes sense. And three, which is what everybody in this Zoom is probably experts at, is just having really good gymnastics technique, right? If you are really, really strong, but you have terrible technique, it's going to be challenging to optimize your power output, right? Vice versa. If you're strong and you have really, really good technique, you're not going to lose energy, right? We all know the classic example of, think about like the younger club gymnast who's like, 10 to 12, and they're still not quite getting the technique yet. They could run as hard as they want, but if they hit the ground with a loose core and a relaxed body shape, it's like a noodle, right? And they go nowhere because their power is not really going anywhere. It's lost, right, when they're not tight. So we need both. We need really good strength. We need coordination of these muscles together, but then we need really, really good gymnastics technique. And that's where the hybrid model starts to get its buds, is from the traditional side of strength and conditioning, but then also the great gymnastics coaching side as well. So in college gymnasts, and particularly, most people are getting a lot filled in that bucket before they come to college, right? They've had a lot of technique, they've learned skills, they understand stuff. You can, of course, make athletes have a better handstand and better technique. I'm not saying you can't, but that bucket has got a lot of stuff put into it pretty much, right? If you look at the science on what is the best way to make kids stronger for 1 and 2, it's weight training, right? Like obviously body weight training is important, core work and body weight jumping and squats and plyos. I use that. It's super important. But if you look at the traditional strength conditioning research, doing properly, dosed weight training and overload is going to unlock massive amounts of strength for the athlete, right? And it's also going to be one of the best things we can do to make those muscles work together. Because when you're squatting with load, if it's slightly heavier than you maybe are comfortable with and you haven't done before, your body finds a way to get more into that, which is usually recruiting more motor units, they're called, or unlocking some of the bigger, fast twitch motor units, which you're going to probably need to get power down the road. So hopefully it's not too much geeky science. I'm trying to sum it up pretty well. If it's confusing, please put it in the chat and I'll clarify questions. But that is the basis in a nutshell of how maybe we can increase force. The second part of the equation, right, is how are we going to play with the time? How do we reduce the time in which that force is expressed? So one is we can do specific exercises like jumps or sprinting work or med ball work, right, or plyometrics and panel mat work or technique to increase how fast we can work, right? We can teach our body to be snappy and quick, right? That is definitely one thing we can do. Okay, we can train those fast twitch fibers to work again in coordination. If we can increase the speed at which they're working at, and we can also time the body, so say the shoulders can close and the core can work and the hips can close together, that arch hollow snap might be much more efficient, right? If we can chain the snap down of a round off technique to be everything working together, we can then hopefully have a much more explosive snap down into the floor. And then three, of course, is really good gymnastics technique, right? Understanding how to manipulate shapes, understanding how to block and have tension in your shoulders. That stuff is all really, really important as well, particularly understanding body tension, right? So we all know and hear how important it is to have body tension and really good maximal contraction of your legs and of your hips and of your core, because again, you're going to not leak as much energy, but shapes are easier to change when your whole body is tight and working together. That's kind of a hallmark of obviously gymnastics technique. So again, in college gymnastics, a lot of these athletes have great technique foundations or have optimized a lot of that. You can certainly make progress, but it's not going to give you this massive return on investment. Like for example, when you look at the studies, what does it say? The best way to get that nervous system working faster or get more fast twitch stuff is particularly weight training, right? Weight training, but also things like med ball work or jumping work and speed work and sprint work. A lot of these drills aren't about high load. They're about low to moderate loads with intent. So really, really working has, like when we do a med ball slam, for example, telling the athlete, I want you to try to put a hole in the ground. And I tell them, if you break this med ball, we'll give you a bonus, right? Like things like that. They're called external cues to try to get the body to really work really, really hard in a safe setting. Okay. So you see the overlap here. The thing that is going to probably get you stronger, right? And the thing that's also going to teach you to work faster has overlap in weight training. But you can also see how there's a very, very importance to never get away from that basic gymnastics technique and that basic core work, the handstands, the rope climbs, the V-ups, the leg lifts. I've never worked with a program where I said, take away all that stuff and just do weight training. That's not at all. And hopefully with these hybrid models, you'll see what I mean. All right. I don't want to tell you that you're going to get away from that, right? I don't think we need to replace anything that's going on. There's nothing that we need to get rid of. Maybe we need to adjust the volume and share some differences of how much, the traditional body weight type stuff to the strength training stuff is done based on the time of the year. But what I always teach people, what I've seen to be really successful and what I think people really have good outcomes with is this hybrid model. Okay. So doing traditional body weight stuff, also doing gymnastic specific weight training. So making sure the exercises that we choose will eventually get to explosive body weight power, right? How you program for a football player versus a tennis player versus a baseball player versus a gymnast does have some foundational base layer things, like they should all probably squat, they should do some single leg stuff. But as you get farther along in terms of what exercises you're picking, you want to start to really tailor things to what they need, right? And with that being said, we have had a lot of experience working with a lot of D1, D2, D3 athletes at Gymnasts at Champion, where I work, and also elite athletes working with their programs and seeing what exercises really do work for this population, right? The 17 plus year old who's got a lot of experience in gymnastics, but is maybe very new to the weight room. We've seen some very positive gains of adding certain exercises in a very low amount and seeing massive amounts of progress because they're so good at gymnastics. They're so good at technique, but they have never gotten some of the light loading or moderate loading they need to get that little bit extra of strength, or to work on med ball work, or to work on very specific jumping work that's not only about plyos on the spring floor. Okay. So that's the basis of it. And the focus will change, as we'll talk about at the end of this lecture, based on the year. The off season and the summer, it might be more 50-50 between those two things. And we'll never lose the gymnastics basics. But as we shift to preseason, it might be 1 or 2, right, sessions per week, but maybe it'll go from a 50-50 split to a 75 gymnastics, 25 weight training, or maybe you can still do 2 days, but it's more biased towards power versus in season. You might either be doing 1 day per week of maintenance care and all gymnastics for routines, or some programs, some, relationships with strength coaches aren't great. So maybe they won't go into the weight room, but the strength coach will come to the gym and do some extra stuff along with prehab work and medical care. So it changes throughout the year. It will never, ever be 100% weight training. And I really want to get that across. Even in the most high level elite athletes that I've worked with, Division I programs that have tons of, great superstars, I'm never saying, please stop gymnastics and only do weight training. Okay. So I hope that really sticks. All right. So the performance aspect of this is just think in your head on your team about athletes who you've tried all the things. You've tried to do drills and skills and everything you possibly could, but no matter how many drills you do or the best things you set up for programming or rest days or work, they just can't seem to make progress in their power. They seem to always fall apart in terms of, making new skills come about or getting through their old skills successfully. They gas out in routines. They don't have a lot of end of steam routine cardio to get through like a dismount or their last tumbling pass. And obviously that starts to shake around the injury risk, right? Landing those last passes short or end of the year, starting to get tired, right? Or it's just straight up, they can't move up in level, and level here means level of collegiate level, right? So like they can't go from that just kind of getting in the scene of freshman year to really excelling and being someone who's a reliable person on your lineup, and then someone who's a staple, junior, senior year, and you can count on for everything you need. In your mind, you think about those things and you think about what's a common denominator between why all those problems exist. And again, it's a lack of this science-based, evidence-based weight training and hybrid model. Because if you have someone who does go through a proper strength training program, that allows them the opportunity to have more strength, as we just talked about, which then gives them the opportunity to work on that and translate that into power and speed. But also strength at a baseline level is a foundation of really good anaerobic cardio, which is that 90-second burst floor routine. Get through it, right? Someone who has a really, really low strength profile and a low training age is not going to always do the best with cardio because they're going to fall apart. They're not going to have muscular endurance. So strength training is a foundational pedestal to then develop that explosive power, that explosive speed, and also the cardio you would need to be successful in, vault, expressing that over 10 seconds or floor, doing that over 90 seconds, but also someone who's better conditioned and has a higher training load can also recover from routines faster and get through a full meet or get through practices and do more load in a 3-hour block. Right. And what that sets us up for next is obviously the ability to train and compete harder skills. If you're stronger and more powerful and you have better cardio, you can do harder D-level passes, right? You can do more blocking height for a 1.5, or go from a layout to a half, or a tuck to a pike, whatever the situation may be. But also you're going to have better overall gas in the tank for practices, right? You're going to be able to do more training load inside of a practice, which is really something that is also important to realize, is that yes, it's important to pull back and to modify and to plan, but sometimes you have to remember that athletes that have a high chronic workload or a high training load, they can be at a high level. They're very, very fit. Those people are also protected against injury if the training is done well and it's done smart. It's not just like a ton of hard reps, right? So this is a way for us to not keep putting skill specific impacts and routines on top of them, but build their capacity up like crazy. And you guys may remember from the Achilles lecture, if you saw that, I talked about raising the floor and raising the ceiling and raising their capacity with this kind of stuff around injury risk. This is the opportunity for us starting in the off season to build a more robust athlete. One of my favorite quotes is, the wider the base, the higher the peak. So if we can build an athlete that can then be fit and strong coming into their preseason, they're going to reach a higher level competitively before season starts. And they're going to have less of that, like I talked about, sand coming through the hourglass. This is how we get more capacity out of the athletes instead of just, doing the same kind of stuff they always do. They don't get stronger or more or adapt. They just kind of go between being conditioned, season kind of takes them down. They take some time off. They come back to their baseline. They get a little fitter, a little stronger because they're doing their body weight work and working hard at conditioning, but they never really excel significantly. The athletes that we are able to work with over the summer for 1 to 2 days in this hybrid model, they see massive improvements over the summer and in the preseason of their overall training load. And that's what we're going for, right? And then lastly here, right, that will give you increased ability to do more skills, move up in that level. Like I said, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year, and they can compete really well because they're really conditioned, they're really fit. So I think rather than, boring you, I wanted to just show you that these are studies that are really, really helpful. There's tons of studies and references in the bottom of the references at the very end. If I have learned one thing from giving and watching lectures, the last thing I want to see is somebody go through 14 references that make my eyes fall out. I will see the ones that are important, but I will look up more after the fact if I'm interested. So here are some things. If you're interested, if you're into that, feel free to check those out, or you can message me. I'll give you the studies. Okay. Also books that are really, really good. This one all the way on the left, obviously is a little bit for the youth population, but these middle 3 books, the strength conditioning book and the physiology training of high performance, very dense, very thick, very intense, but they really have served me well in terms of learning the foundational stuff that I'm going to teach you guys about. So if you're curious about that, check it out. If you don't want to read that and you're not a nerd like me, feel free to just listen. So I think the best way to do this is to go through some examples of how certain skills that I know people want will show up. We're going to go event by event and just look at stuff. Again, Kylie here, she's the star of the show. She's given me permission to use all her videos and all her release forms, stuff like that. So I will play it once through in regular, and then I will go through hand because I know it'll be glitchy. So she's a phenomenal vaulter. So here we see Yurchenko full, and I will slow this down myself. So you can see, just look at the pieces. So I have a basic run. We're going to make this show up in exercise selection and hopefully try to illustrate the point of how what exercises we choose are going to show up in terms of sprinting speed or blocking angle or whatever else it is. Okay, so when you look at that and you break things down in freeze frames, some of the Kodak moments I think that are good to look at is this is what you see in running and in this hurdle. You can see how the sprinting kind of one leg, it's called the split pelvis position, that is really going to show up in things like split squats or single leg hip thrust, single leg weight, or wall sprinting drills, right? Developing the general capacity to get strong in those positions and then do drills like sprint work that teaches you the key fundamental elements of running posture, how to run correctly, how to use that strength fast. That is how you get someone faster. And that's one of the biggest things that we see with a little bit of strength training and a little bit of technique on how to sprint well, not point your toes, keep your shins up, where should your arms go? And then we get athletes stronger is their ability to get down the runway faster. Those first 3 steps of their floor tumbling pass are just through the roof. And we see what's called a 10-meter dash time go up. We can see with timing gates over the course of 3 months in the summer, they truly get faster by just doing a little bit of strength work and a little bit of sprint technique work versus hitting the table here shows up in some overhead position work here. So this is a landmine press you can't see. but she's doing some landmine press, trying to developing the strength of her shoulder to handle that impact over here. And then obviously the most, clear one that I've talked about with the landing stuff is proper hinging and proper squatting loading will give you a better capacity to handle forces, right? To handle high landing forces. You guys might have remembered the stat that these landing forces are anywhere between 15 to 18 times body weight. The largest force that we've seen during back tumbling of the ankle is 23 times body weight down here at this joint. So being able to be strong and then slowly condition somebody to do plyos towards the end of the August summer helps them smoothly get back to everyone on this call and have a nice slow on ramp versus, not doing this. And maybe it's a shock to their system when they go back and start doing things. All right, here's another one. Again, I'll play it once through, and then I'll scan it myself because of the glitch. Kylie is also one of my favorite humans in the world. So extra shout out. Okay. And so just looking through this slow-mo, just look for key positions, right? Put your gymnastics hat on, but also just put your general movement hat on. Okay. And then when you look at these and you break it down, right, these are some of the shapes that show up. So obviously this handstand position is the same kind of idea we're talking about. So a combination of landmine work for athletes that maybe have some shoulder flexibility issues, but also things like dumbbell push presses help us to get a dumbbell push press can help you get a lot of weight overhead safely without having to press it. So it works on that kind of like initial impact that comes on their shoulders. That obviously will show up in handstands, but also this shoot over down here, right? This rapid open shoulder position. So from closed to open, right? And then also the sit-up position that can be really developed with things like seated med ball work. You can have somebody sit with straight arms and take their legs out of the equation and throw them a light med ball as hard and as fast as they can overhead, right? And try to develop that explosive speed to try to mimic what's going to happen over here when you get back on the bar. Okay. So you can develop the strength of the shoulder and the upper back, and then you can put that into a power situation with things like med ball work to then show, okay, I want you to go as hard as you can. But this is a very safe setting, right? Like yes drills are another way to do this very safely, but throwing a med ball as hard as you can overhead is a way to say, go as hard as you possibly can. And that links back to, teaching the nervous system to work very quick and helping coordinate these muscles together. And then maybe after 2 to 3 weeks, she would stand up and she would do this so she could use her hips as well and work on what's called triple extension and using the hips, the core, and the arms together, which starts to mimic back tumbling and things like that. Versus down here, the opposite, this closing shoulder. So the arch hollow scoop for the shoot over is going to be also something we can develop with tall kneeling overhead med ball throws. And again, it will show up with the catching position as well. So another example of how these things can show up in skills.
Hey, we got a question in the chat from Melanie.
All right. So you mentioned split squats. Are you using Olympic full lift versions from the floor or with the clean or split? So you may be referring to like jerks, like split jerks, I think, with the barbell or stuff like that. So the split squats we're talking about are rear foot and rear foot elevate. Yeah, good question. So we're talking about like regular split squats, just down and up, but then progressing to rear foot elevated split squats and front foot elevated split squats as a strength base. As we get to the power stuff, we might do like split squat jumps, right? Or sprint work or speed sled sprints, that kind of stuff. We do a little bit of Olympic lifting variance with people, probably with dumbbells who are very advanced, like, hang snatches or stuff like that. But we don't do a ton of barbell Olympic lifting with the athletes only because it takes so much time to teach them how to do them correctly. And we typically only have them for, 3 months when they come home, and we want to try to get bigger rocks. So yeah, good question, but typically not as much. Yeah, no big deal. Share screen again, I think. Bear with me. Is there any research on open chain work above the head being applicable to inverted closed chain work? To be specific, has anyone studied overhead dumbbell or barbell work and how it directly affects handstand shapes? No, I wish they did, because I would have a much easier time designing programs. That is, I have a long laundry list of things that I hope I can study if I had an unlimited budget, and that is one of them. But yeah, right now, unfortunately, there's not any research to my knowledge about how, the general work would show over in a better handstand or stuff. Yeah, exactly. Times when you wish you were baseball and you had $1 million budget, right? I'm going to keep the chat open, so if people have questions, I'll stop. But yeah, let's watch this one. So handspring layout, step out. And again, I'll go through it slow. And the point I'm trying to illustrate here, hopefully, as we start seeing repetitive pictures, is that working a few things helps a lot of things, right? By working on our shoulder and legs, we get floor and vault benefits. By working our shoulders in opening closing shapes with med balls, we get floor and vault and tumbling benefits together, right? And handstand shaping. So here we can see it show up as a few things, right? So over here, again, this open arch snap position, right? This explosive leg power, this closed to open, squatting and hinging is really your number way to develop that. Squatting, hinging, and split pelvis stuff that develops the quads, it develops the hamstrings and the calf to have an explosive toe point and get off the beam really well. Again, this open shoulder impact position shows up as things overhead, and this open shoulder position here for the second handspring and layout step out, that can be developed with things like med balls. And I'm not saying it's only med balls. There are plenty of things to work on here, but that is one of our favorites. And it's just for the sake of argument is one of the things I think most people understand. Okay. And then landing on one leg, I think that is clearly something people want to develop for beam and for what's called like stability, strength and stability to do that. How do you do that? Single leg training, right? So single leg RDLs, single leg step ups, doing a lot of accessory work. That is how we really develop the ability to be strong on one leg and handle some of these forces. All right. And then last one here. All right. So double pike, and I will go through it slow again. So 3 to 4 steps of sprinting, takeoff, landing. Okay. And when you look at here, what do we see? Right. So these shapes kind of show up again. We see things show up very commonly as, again, the running stuff, same as vault, right? The same stuff's going to make your vault speed and also your floor speed together get better. And then this open and closed shape position. So from hollow to arch back to a pike in this situation, again, we get the block off the floor, which you can't see here, but that comes from being able to block off your back handspring well. And then these med ball things show up again. And then lastly, not to belabor the point, but landing forces. Anyone knows, I'd probably wish you wouldn't land like that, but that's a discussion for a different time. But yes, how do we develop the capacity to handle some of those not so ideal landings, hinging, squatting, all these things show up together. All right. So then let's talk about injuries, because that's ironically what I just led the topic on. But the same kind of idea, right? How do you think about your team in front of you? Do you know people who, no matter what you try, they always struggle with injuries? They're always kind of on the sideline. They can't quite do the full assignment because something hurts or they have nags. I'm not saying that's going to all go away, because it's impossible. That's how gymnastics is. That's how all sports are. But think about the people who are like constantly getting re-injuries. They're constantly having like bugging things that they can't train. They can't compete, or they're missing multiple extended weeks of training because of that. And this is something that really breaks my heart. Is I work with a lot of people, obviously at the club level. Kylie's a perfect example. I worked with Kylie when she was 13. She first started working with me for issues when she was younger. And I saw her work her whole life super hard to try to get to college. And then she kind of rode the roller coaster with her knee for a while and some other stuff. And there are other people that I've worked with that worked their whole life to get on a team. You know, they just wanted to make it to level 9 and get on a college team, and they're in D3, and it changed their life and they love gymnastics. That's what happened to me. That was my story. But they get to school, and the first year to 2 years is so limited by injuries and burnout and being, frustrated with their body that they can't, train because they're in pain. A lot of this stuff comes down to the fact that obviously at the NCAA level, we can benefit from this, but it needs to translate down to the club level, whereas these athletes are starting when they're 12, 13, kind of mixing things up a little bit. And so the same exact idea comes up is, if you look at the research, right, around the biggest topics that we have in gymnastics that are problems: Achilles tears, ACL tears, stress fractures, labral tears, rotator cuff tears. I'm super lucky that, like I said, some of my friends and mentors are the world's best leading experts on stuff like this. Jill Cook for Achilles tears and Achilles tendinopathy, Tim Gavitt in workloads, and then Mike and Lenny here, who own the clinic I work at. They're pretty famous in shoulder and knee for baseball stuff. And I've been lucky to have them by the next desk over, and they watch all these gymnasts come in, they watch all the things we're doing. And they have all said that if they could change one thing in the culture, it'd be that they adopted strength training at a younger age, and they used a hybrid model instead of just sport specific training, right? That's why there's so many professional baseball players who work in the weight room a little bit. They also do their baseball specific conditioning and throwing, right? Same thing with runners, same thing with track athletes, same thing with every other sport pretty much, but gymnastics, to be honest. Sometimes you dance into a couple ones like figure skating that carry and ballet that are actually coming along well. But if they have told me that if they could snap their fingers and have a magic wand to help one thing in gymnastics, it would be a hybrid model of strength training. So with that being said, you look at the common grounds here. If you do a properly implemented hybrid strength program, you're going to increase the strength of the bone, the tendon, the muscle, and the cartilage, right? You get overload and it causes your body to adapt and get stronger. That's the basis of a lot of things, right? It's called Wolff's Law, but that's a foundational component of this. If we have better bone capacity and tendon capacity, you can handle more high force skills, right? It's an equation of force capacity versus, force loading. If your capacity in your knees are lower and the force is more, it tips the scale towards the side that might get some cranky injuries, right? But also by teaching someone how to move well and do these things, you can maybe handle these landings a little bit better. You learn how to squat properly. You learn how to absorb these forces, right? That's a byproduct as well. And then as you're stronger and you're not in pain, right, you can increase your training load, right? You can handle more practice time. You can handle harder, more aggressive training that's smart to build up your workload. And again, enter the preseason or enter the season with a much higher overall capacity. And you're able to do more repetitions of what you want for skills and work on the technical nitty gritties without pain being the limiting factor, right? Or somebody's body breaking down being the limiting factor. And then obviously all the things we want, you have reduced risk of acute injury, you have reduced risk of overuse injury, right? And a less risk of re-injuring things if you can rebuild their capacity. And I know the reality of working in season with athletes. I work with a lot of the club and the elites here right now. And a lot of them are hitting that brick wall of, I want to keep going it, but my body is hurting, my back's hurting, my knees are hurting. So we have to think way ahead of that and think about, well, what can we do? We can't do much in season, right? It's like you're playing with fire if you're trying to push and pull and get someone to go. But in the beginning of the start here, which is why we're going to talk about yearly planning, is it's the off season, right? That really makes all the difference leading into the preseason. Those 3 to 4 months are like open season to make the athlete get stronger and fitter. And I know there's obviously a challenge with working with athletes who are home. I totally get it. But this is really our golden opportunity to try to reduce the risk of injuries come now, March, April, May, right? Starts in May of last year and June of last year. Okay. So again, research, if you're looking on how strength training reduces injury risk, there's plenty of stuff to jump into it, particularly with the knee and the ankle and the lower back. But if you want to look at that, check it out. If you're not a geek like me, please ignore it. Okay. So let's go through some of the myths, right? Let's go through some of the myths here. And I'm going to try to explain these well. Well, isn't it going to make gymnasts bulky, right? That's something I hear all the time. Am I going to get massive muscle mass? So in order to reverse engineer this, you have to look at, well, what makes somebody bulky? And I've been really lucky to work with some professional bodybuilders and some people who literally want to do this for a living. What needs to happen? Well, one, in order to get non-functional bulk or mass, that's not like lean body mass for power. One is you have to consistently eat a ridiculous amount, right? If you watch the nutritional profiles of some of these like a high level bodybuilders, like football players or weightlifters or bodybuilders, they eat a ridiculous amount all the time. And that's oftentimes not what's happening with gymnasts who are lifting weights, right? Number two is you have to go from 0 to 100 and really ramp up your training volume a lot. What that means is lifting weights, heavy weights at high intensity, 4 to 5 days per week, and doing sets that are almost working to failure, right? So that's like, when you look at the research on this, so think about doing 8 to 12 sets of squats at a moderate load, going close to failure multiple days per week, right? I work with friends that are literally Olympic weightlifters, and they want to add 5 pounds on their frame to lift more on a barbell. The amount they have to squat and work out and eat to do that is absurd, right? And I've talked to friends of mine who are nutritionists working with elite gymnasts, and they've supported a lot of this kind of stuff. Okay. Along with that, you have to really only specifically focus on the weight. You have to be in the weight room all the time with a lot of external load. Just doing body weight repetitions is not going to put on some of that high volume you need to do it. Okay. And you also typically need to do a lot of isolated movements on top of those bigger movements. So squatting really heavy at a really intense load and then going a ton of knee extensions, right? That's not what we're trying to advise here with people. That's not what I promote with a hybrid model. And I'll show you the difference. Okay. Look at the evidence on what it takes to really build massive hypertrophy and bulkiness or non-functional lean body mass, right? Think about like a 100-meter sprinter, right? Like they have to put on so much to sprint faster, but they're shredded off their times, right? Versus someone who's like like I said, a weightlifter or a power lifter who's a little bit more robust in their profile. But if you look at the science of how to build straight up just muscle hypertrophy maximal versus what I talked about before, which is build a strength base that's well-rounded, always train athletic qualities, then move that to explosive power, then go do gymnastics. It's a completely different ballpark, right? And if you have a great strength coach who understands this research, they'll program exercises and sets and reps that don't really do that. There'll be a little bit probably because it's a training thing. They're not used to it, slightly of it, but if you work on it, it's probably not something to worry about. Hey, Eric Helms is one of the best researchers in this place. So we're not talking about benching 315. We're not talking about squatting ridiculous weights for 1 rep only, right? We're not talking about bodybuilding. We're talking about these things over here, like I talked about, calf raise work, right? Split squats, properly done goblet squats, right? This is not going to be an absurd, meathead scream your face off program at all. Okay. So on the other side, how do we prevent this, right? So one is you have to have a phenomenal sports nutrition and strength conditioning team on board to help advise some of these things. Shout out to all those people who do it. You're amazing. Okay. Generally, what I recommend is we're going to lift maximally 2 days per week in the off season, right? So along with maybe 3 to 5 days of the actual gymnastic stuff, we're going to probably be doing only 2 days in the weight room of a compound approach, right? We're not going to be doing hypertrophy based work. We're probably going for max strength, which is probably 3 to 5 sets of 6 to 10, depending on the research you read, with a moderate weight, but a high intensity focus. So a lot of effort put in, a lot of compound multi-joint movements. We'll always be doing some gymnastic stuff every single day. And we're never going to be we might do some accessory work for like the hip or the rotator cuff, but we're definitely not going to have somebody go over and do 5 sets of super heavy knee extensions to failure, right? That's not going to be what we're going for. We're going to follow this funnel of build a strength base in the summer, get general power, and then try to get that into the actual gymnastics routine stuff. All right. So just shooting myself in the foot, my traditional old school mindset of developing like leg circuits, for example, which is what you see a lot at the club level, was very classically wrong for this kind of stuff, right? So like 45 seconds of squat jumps, then go over and run for 45 seconds, do a bunch of panel mat plyos, and then do some more resi jumps, right? Or like bar conditioning would be like tons of rope climbs, tons of leg lifts, tons of pull-ups, tons of chin-up levers, tons of band pull-downs. Nothing wrong with that in the right dose. But in my head, I'm literally working what I think is right. And it's doing the exact same muscle group over and over and over for really high reps with really low body weight load. And what it gets is really high fatigue and really high metabolic load close to failure. Honestly, and I've talked to some strength coaches about this, I was probably building sets and reps that were building the hypertrophy I didn't want because I didn't understand the science of this kind of stuff versus doing what we'll talk about, which is this hybrid model. Doing 20 minutes of squat jumps and running and mat plyos is like quad, right? And you see a lot of athletes who develop very, very, strong quads, which is awesome, but they're not balanced. They don't have good balance of their quads to hamstrings and glutes. And it starts to get into a problem with sprinting power or running power or landing power. But it also gets into a huge problem with injury risk because we overload their anterior chain or their quads. So I was probably doing exactly what I thought I didn't want to do by doing traditional old school methods. There's a time and place for it. Don't get me wrong, but it has to be in the right dosage and in the right time. This is a great quote by Dr. Sands, who's probably one of the most well-researched people in the sport of gymnastics. He's worked enormously with high-level gymnasts, and he back in 2000 said this, that it's probably misguided what we're doing in terms of being worried about that stuff. If we program correctly, we're probably going to enhance the performance of female gymnasts with the proper dosage of weight training. Okay. So what about number 2? Doesn't it make them less flexible, right? Don't you turn into the thing and you lose all your muscle flexibility and you just like turn into a rock who can't lift or I can't move, right? So in the short term, yes, because you're going to be a little sore from lifting, right? That's delayed onset muscle soreness. That's a very normal thing, but also that happens in gymnastics, right? We all know that happens with gymnastics training itself. So it's not exclusively weight training. Again, if you get a strength coach who's like, wow, we have these great athletic gymnasts who are super flexible and they bury them in a really, really hard strength program, that's too much. That's problematic, right? But we can't do that. How do you prevent this, right? How do you prevent this? You look at the studies and say it's actually probably the opposite, right? You look at eccentrics in particular, a slow tempo pause eccentric has decent support to increase range of motion, not reduce range of motion, right? If you get past the acute DOMS thing. So what I mean by that is like tempo pause RDLs, like you see here on the right, tempo pause split squats, right? Step ups with a 3-second lower, tempo pause push-ups, right? We do a lot of these things programmed for athletes because we keep the total weight down and they develop not only great strength, but they actually feel more mobile. They feel like their splits are more comfortable to get into because that elevated split squat is pushing them into a position they're going to use in their switch leap or something like that. So this one was a total like facepalm moment for me because when I read the research, not only was it not what I thought, it was probably the opposite, right? If you have a good program that's balanced well. A lot of research on this if you want to check it out, about eccentrics, about regular stretching, all that kind of stuff. If you're a geek, check it out. But how do we avoid this, right? So one is you go into your strength program of the summer knowing someone's going to be sore and you accept that as part of the reality, right? You plan for that, right? You have to have a really balanced strength program, which is why we do like squatting and hinging and split pelvis and single leg work, not just all the squats. right? Doing things like eccentrics or tempos, doing a lot of soft tissue work and warm-ups around their training programs, and having really good science-based recovery methods to maintain tissue quality. Sleeping well, hydration, fueling for performance with nutrition, and proper muscle recovery. By the way, that is my favorite meme of all time. It goes in every single slide show that I try to give to people. So I hope you guys can enjoy that. All right. And then last one, before we get into some nuts and bolts of the yearly programming, what about injuries, right? People always say that quite a bit. I think this is hypocritical. It's hilarious because the forces of tumbling are ridiculous. So if you say that 4 sets of 8 goblet squats is bad for someone's knees, then doing 4 to 8 double backs per week is terrible for someone's knees, right? The forces are astronomically higher on floor and vault compared to a goblet squat. And I'm not knocking it, right? Because clearly I'm a coach and I'm having people do these skills. But I've talked to some coaches who are like, I'm never weight training. It's so bad for their knees. They're going to get hurt. I'm like, do you see her landing? Do you see her landing under rotated? Like we can't have the double standard there. So what I do for people is I try to educate them. And I say, hey, listen, the science supports that this is actually one of the best things to do if it's done properly. But I try to reframe these things into capacity and force, right? Reframe it as how 20-pound weighted pogo hops can mimic a little bit of the force on a round up back handspring layout. We can condition their Achilles tendon. We can condition their calves to get stronger. And that down the road, as we overload it and get them stronger, will help them prevent some of the force overload, right? 30 pounds of a push press is maybe 1/10 of your chankle block. These numbers are not accurate to scale. I'm just kind of using figures, but you can understand how doing landmine presses or push presses might mimic the blocking impact that you're going to need when you want to go do your tuck or your layout, your full, your 1.5 double full, whatever. Okay. And squatting is probably the most easy example, right? A properly done 50-pound goblet squat is probably 1/10 of a dismount. That is not 1/10 of a dismount because of the massive force differential, but the explanation there hopefully is that it's a little bit more overload for them. Okay. So what does cause injuries when you look at the research, if you actually dig into the methods, it's actually kind of hilarious because like some of the injuries are like 5 injuries in this weightlifting program. And it's like in some random guy's basement that like he's designing his own weird squat rig. It's like literally this happens. And 2 of the injuries because they dropped weights on their feet, which is hilarious, right? There are some times when you see injuries happening. If someone has really bad programming, they spike up their workload. They don't have great coaching, great cueing. It's not individualized to the gymnast. They just took a football program and gave it to a gymnast, right? That kind of stuff, you do see problems. But again, that's why you have to work with a really great strength coach and think ahead on these things and not just throw a program at someone who's not trained for it. All right. So from here, we'll stop and we'll pause and we'll go about 15, 20 more minutes on the yearly periodization. Then I'll take questions. But does anyone have any questions leading up to right now? Let me get out of here because I want to make sure that that was understood, that wasn't too stressful, that like we're all on the same page here. So anybody got something there before I intentionally make time for a water break and then we'll go on?
So far, I think it's pretty good.
All right, cool. So now we're going to move on to talk about the biggest next chunk, which I think I've made this mistake before and people have sometimes unfortunately not gotten it. If we dive right into give me the best exercises, tell me how many sets and reps and tell me what to do and give me the circuits without giving you a framework of what to do, this is going to make no sense. This is going to make no sense at all. Okay. Meredith says, what is the pogo? So pogo jumps are when you have weights by your sides and you're literally just doing like stiff jumps up and down with like very fast twitch jumping off the ground. So it's like a pogo hop, like you would do like a panel mat hop up and down. That is technically a pogo hop, but this is on hard ground with like 10-pound dumbbells in their hands. So they're just jumping in place on the floor. Yep. All right. So let's get back in here. All right. And again, I'm going to show you a lot of information. I'm going to show you the big picture stuff, but all the templates that you can walk through and build this on your own. You can literally write down how many months do I want to do this. All of the templates are in a slideshow that I share with other people when I consult, how you can literally build your own yearly competitive program from scratch. And Jason actually and I went on a call a month ago. We said that the biggest error you can make is wait until May and be like, hey, let's build a strength program. Because you get tidal waved with information and what to do, you get paralyzed. So if you want to have a successful next year, you should start maybe next month having a lunch with your strength coach or with your medical staff or saying like, hey, I know we're in the thick of it right now. I know we're getting buried right now and we can't even look at the summer, but maybe we should start thinking about what are we going to change? What do we learn from a presentation that we want to take into it? What's good, what's not? Have that conversation in March or in April. And then in May and in June, you can hit the floor running after your deload season when they have finals and stuff, and you can get going, and be a little bit more, on top of things. Okay. So from here, right? This is going to be based on all of the things that I have, a good experience with, right? Obviously talking with these programs that are on this call, coaching in real life problems of dealing with like what actually happens during a season, working with a lot of athletes, right? And reading a lot of research and science. Okay. The reason I say that is I will give you what I think is really valuable to my approach to what sections of the year you're doing certain things. But you all on this call know your athletes way more than I do, right? I'm not going to be able to build the perfect program for you. That's why you need a great strength coach. That's why you need to think about these things ahead of time. Because if you want to be ahead of the curve, you have to be thinking about, okay, well, those things made sense from Dave, but I don't think these things make sense for us right now. Or we have the resources and the time for this, but not this, right? You're going to need to apply this properly on top of you as a layer 2-on-1. I can't just give you the copy paste cookie cutter program, right? This is what we do for our athletes here. So that being said, this is really going to be about dosage, right? The misconception inside of gymnastics is that work plus work plus work equals progress, right? That's not how the human body works. Anybody who's burnt out in the middle of seasons knows that. But the proper dosage of stress and the proper dosage of recovery is how you're going to get someone to make progress, right? The analogy that I like here is aspirin, right? Aspirin is really good for your headache if you have one. But if you take 0 or 40, you're in trouble, right? 0, you don't get better. 40, you have a stomach ulcer, right? So it's all about dosage, right? Too little, we're not going to do anything. We're not going to adapt. We're not going to get them ready for the season and whatever else is happening. Too much, we're going to overload somebody. We're going to have poor performance. We're probably going to risk injury. We're also going to risk burnout. And that's supported by literature that way too much training load, way too aggressively, it does tank performance, but underdosing someone is also going to probably not get them ready and probably have them have a really poor outcome. So I like to think about periodization here. If you're not familiar with the term periodization, this means just fluctuating loads, light, medium, heavy off days to try to ride that curve and try to make sure that we're giving someone a good hard training session, but followed by the proper dosage of deloading and pulling back so their body can recover. It's called a fitness fatigue model or some other models that are more updated, stuff like that. Okay. So this helps to create what is called a super compensation. So we help the athlete adapt and get stronger over time. We build them up. Okay. And it also helps them to peak for bigger performances, right? We all know the end of the year, that second part of season is probably where we really want to be in peak shape. So if we don't plan these loads and fluctuate the athletes and give them the proper hard dose of training and the proper deload, but also like a really hard training week and then a hard, a back off week or a deload week, we might gas pedal too early, too soon, and might have not have enough steam in the tank at the end of the year. Like we talked about, not enough sand in the hourglass when the biggest performances come. So it helps to also maintain health and wellness because the athletes, need to see a light at the end of the tunnel. Sometimes you say, like, I know these 2 weeks are going to be hard. We're going to get through it, but then we're going to pull back a little bit. And so just give me these 2 weeks and we'll find our way through here. Okay. All three, physically, mentally, and emotionally. All right. So this is a graph that I think is really helpful from a great paper in 2016. And also Tim Gabbett, who if you guys are familiar with the workload study we're doing and many other things, he's helped me design this. So we load the athlete, we give them a recovery. And if we plan this right by listening, monitoring, doing feedback, planning out the weeks and things in advance, we can see what's called the super compensation. So over time, they build up, they build up, they build up, and then they're really, really good. If we apply a training load or a hard session too early, or we don't give them enough recovery time, we might see them tick down this way, which is they can't really handle their training load, but they're also at an increased risk of injury. Okay. Another really good chart here is to kind of look at the load recovery and how you build capacity. Again, if you load the athletes at the appropriate level, allow them recovery, whether that's overnight, whether that's a couple of days or a week, you can build them up higher so that when they do take a similar training load that's more intense or the same intensity, when they drop down, they aren't dropping down below this line. Hopefully they're dropping down here and then they're again a bit increasing their capacity over time. And you just ride this wave uphill, hopefully, so that your athletes are really, really prepared and are feeling like they're in charge, of what their training is. So this is going to be the overview of how you start from the really big picture goal and you work your way all the way down to what do you do on bars for one day. Okay. So you start with a multi-year goal, then you work your way down to an individual goal. And you break that down farther into chunks, right? So 3-month chunks across the season. I'm not going to use the technical periodization terms to not confuse people, but we then break the maybe 3-month block or the 1-month block down into the individual weeks of what are we doing. And then we take that individual week, right? And we say, okay, what are we doing on this individual day, right? So what are we doing on this day? How many events? Are we doing strength? Are we doing the weight room? Are we not doing the weight room? Are we doing cardio? Are we not doing cardio? And then you eventually just give somebody a training assignment, right? You give someone an actual 5 vaults, 10 vaults, whatever. Here are your sets and reps for leg lifts or rope climbs. Here are your sets and reps for, squats or whatever else is. So the long-term goal, you work towards your biggest meet in college usually, right? Which is going to be the end of the year. right? Then we have an off season, a preseason, and an in-season chunk. I separate into in-season 1 and in-season 2, or A and B, because the early is kind of getting going. Peaking and championship is the second part. And then you have your loading and your deloading weeks. Which week are we going hard? Which week are we pulling back? And then maybe we would have, Monday through Sunday with 5 days, right, worth of practice time. And then what days are we going to make heavy, medium, light, or off? And then here's this day, here are the events, here's your strength and conditioning, and then here's your assignment: basics, skills, upgrades, whatever else you would like to be. Okay. So the application to college, right, is going to be, when you look at these blocks all together, probably going to be the multi-year goal is keep athletes as healthy as possible and have the highest competitive team possible, right? That's what most people on this call want. They want the athletes to be healthy, happy, but also very highly competitive. And you want to build a more competitive team each year. Okay. Individual goals typically in this population are going to come to conferences, regionals, or championships. There might be some different ones in there, obviously, but those are the big ones. Okay. And then in the month blocks, we're probably going to break this up into an off season, a preseason, an in-season A, and an in-season B. This is my approach, and I think I've seen this be very successful. Is the off-season is that June to August block. The preseason is that September to December block. Your in-season is January and February, where your first meet, you're just kind of getting yourself together. What are your lineups? What are your skills? Who's going to compete well? Who's maybe not available? All that kind of stuff. And then your peaking season or your championship season is that March through April, and then May. I don't know why it says April instead of through May, but April is usually where most people are. So I put that. Okay. And then a week example of week blocks for 1 month of that might be, we're going to go really hard for 3 weeks. We're going to push the routines. We're going to push the volume. We're going to back off for 1 week. If it's off season, it might be truly just deloading and taking time off. If it's in season, it might be, we're not going to compete. We're going to take this bye week. We're not going to travel or whatever else it is. And then during your individual week, maybe you do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Saturday as your days you choose to actually work out. Maybe you'll do 2 heavy days, 2 medium days, and 1 light day. Individual day, just an example. Let's warm up. Let's do 3 events, and then let's do our strength and conditioning for the day. Your assignment, I'm just making this up in the off season, right, would be, let's warm up with some basics. Let's do 5 of every skill in your routine, or 5 of these 3 skills with drills on the side. And then we'll do some upgrades after that. It's a classic coaching hat assignment for people. All right. So this is the kind of 3 blocks, and these pictures are going to start to get very crowded very fast. And I'm going to walk through things on one slide, but I want you to have all the information you need to feel successful. And again, this is all inside the template. This is inside the planning worksheets. You can email me after. The video is recorded. Like I'd rather over deliver and have you guys have things to talk about in your meetings than leave you short and be like, well, I don't want to give you everything because I don't want to overwhelm you. Everyone here is very intelligent. You guys can all figure this out. But when I look at this season, this is what it looks like for me. Any college gymnast that we work with, any team I consult with, this tends to be the best skeleton start. And then you can change things as you want, right? So like I said, June, have 2 weeks off, and then 2 weeks ramping up after finals and people settle. Off season, you're working pretty hard for strength and conditioning and skills and all that kind of stuff. Preseason will probably sit in this September, October, November. And then December, I said, is kind of iffy. Some people like to compete in December and do inter squads in November, December. Some people don't like to compete until after the winter break. So it's kind of personal preference. I don't think there's a bad or good way, in-house versus traveling. And then obviously January, February, you're getting after it. You're competing. You guys are doing awesome. And then March, April, right? You guys are getting after it in terms of championship season. And then you would probably loop things back around and you would have May as your off season. Okay. So this is what I think is probably most effective. There's obviously some conversation about what's better for you, but the majority of programs that I work with, this seems to be really good. Okay. So there's 4 things that I'm constantly thinking about when I look at these. So 4 categories. I'm looking at the gymnastic skills versus half routines versus combinations and, getting routines together. I'm looking at the strength. I'm looking at the cardio, and then I'm looking at the actual athlete wellness. And we'll talk about cardio routines and stuff next week, but this is kind of the big 4 things that I'm juggling all the time. All right. This is overwhelming. I know, but we'll walk our way through it. Okay. So off season first, June, July, August, right? Gymnastics, you're working on skills, right? You're either working old skills, getting new skills, trying to stay in skills and shape and whatever you want to do. During the strength period, this is where I typically like to go 50-50. So like I said, 50% of your time is general with maybe 2 days in the weight training room. 50% of your time is maybe gymnastic specific with just circuits and stuff in the actual gym, doing your handstands, your rope climbs. Every day has like warm-ups and basics and some sort of basic work if you can do it. But for this majority of this summer block here, I'm doing 50-50, 2 days in the gym, 2 days weight training, and then 3 to 4 days inside of the practice gym, depending on the athlete. I will tell you from experience, the athletes that come home to us, if they can get to the weight room 2 times and work out in their gym 3 to 4 days, with 2 of those days being gymnastics days, they feel amazing. They feel really good. They don't feel like they're burning themselves out. They go back to preseason feeling much, much better. Okay. In terms of cardio, we're not going to dig super deep into the physiology of it, but The general aerobic side of things typically is developed in the off season. So with circuits or with intervals and stuff like that, we'll talk about it next week more. But again, 50-50. I like doing some general conditioning inside the weight training room with bikes and sleds and ropes and all that kind of stuff. We have some really great circuits, but then also I think it's good to do some circuits inside the gym with, station on rope climb, 40 seconds, move over to, something on bars for 40 seconds and do like a traditional kind of circuit. But these develop the base of the cardio base that then becomes the foundation for go hard in 90 seconds and don't fall apart. During this time, we're also doing a lot of individual movement screening. The ATs, the PTs are involved quite a bit. I'm screening all the athletes we work with at home. They come to me first at Champion as a medical provider, and then we allow them to go in the weight room if we figure out, what aches and pains you have. We built in a lot of accessory work, a lot of prehab work to their warm up, to their kind of like interset work, or to the end of their stuff to kind of do some cleanup work. And then oftentimes when they're home, they'll probably do, if someone's got an injury, obviously like a surgery, they're with me the whole time. But if someone's just training, they'll come to me once every 2 weeks for 30 minutes and we'll just tune up. We'll do some talking about what's going on, soft tissue stuff. But that's going on the whole summer because we're trying to maintenance care some of their bigger nagging injuries and stuff like that. Okay. So the next block would be the preseason. So September, October, November. Usually you're putting your skill combinations together in September. You start doing half routines or even full routines in October. And then you're doing your full routines or inner squads or all that kind of stuff in November. That's kind of a pretty classic progression there. For strength and conditioning, we're typically shifting things over more into the gymnastics side. So I have seen programs that do 50-50 and the weight room is just all explosive power work and maintaining strength and power or building it. I've seen other places where, again, that relationship with the strength coach isn't awesome. So they don't want to do too much extra work while they're trying to build up their explosive power and trying to put their skills and routines together because it's just too much on their body. So 75-25 for most people seems to work well, or 50-50 if you have a great team on board. You're trying to maintain your strength, but also really build a lot of power, right? And that's what happens over here is we're really working on like sprint work and jumps and sleds and really explosive work to try to get, again, all of that strength gains, hopefully that happen in the summer, to show up in very fast twitch, go as hard as you possibly can. That's the goal here. And then on the energy system side, we're moving away from that general base to more of the explosive interval work. So whether it's circuits, whether it's sled push routines, whether it's, bike sprints, whether it's sled work, like all that kind of stuff. There's a million ways to do this well. And we'll talk about next week the dangers of jumping into routine stuff too fast versus getting the athlete generally conditioned in that very aggressive 90-second window for a month or so. But I'm generally shifting over towards more of that, short bursted anaerobic type work and not the aerobic work. But I still might do an active recovery day, hop on the bike for 20 minutes just to kind of keep the blood pumping on a day you feel really, really sore. And then throughout this entire time, everybody knows the struggle of this, but we're trying as much as we can to educate the athletes on recovery, right? Educate the athletes on how to get better sleep, how to fuel yourself well, how to manage your time, how to manage your stress levels, how to do your rehab, how to show up and do it. Like, what do you need to do? It's just education, like nonstop. I educate as much as I possibly can, guest speakers, people from other departments, like guest lectures, all that kind of stuff, to hopefully have them set up really, really well to know how to take care of themselves in season when things get pretty tough and brutal, to be honest. All right. So that's the first part. And then again, December is up in the air for those people who are maybe competing or not competing, but everyone is pretty much doing routines, right? You're competing in pressure sets. So December, January, February is your, what I call an A set. So what are the basic requirements? How do you get a 10? How do you get your start values? How do you make sure you're confident in your hits? But you're doing typically pressure sets, you're doing meets, you're doing routines, you're doing the actual thing, right? So for strength and for energy system, it's just all gymnastics, right? Like I said, in season, some people will do one day in the weight room as a maintenance care type stuff to maintain their strength and power, which is awesome if done well. But also I think sometimes it's a really good way to build in more of that medical accessory prehab work that maybe you don't have time to because they're rushing from class for 20 minutes or whatever else it is. So a lot of times I'll talk with people, and the strength coach and the AT will team up together and kind of divide and conquer on all the things that the coaches are too busy to get in during the gym. And you'll try to maybe build that in. So we would do that. That's just competing. That's the season. That's literally where we just got past here. We're in February now, but that's where we're at. And then athlete wellness is you're doing as much as you possibly can to keep the athletes healthy and well, right? All the gymnasts at Champion, I'm really lucky that they'll come for maintenance care once a week, once every 2 weeks in season. I'm talking with a lot of their coaches to modify things, adjust things, tweak their programming, work on some different skill changes if they need to. What aches and pains are we dealing with? You're just trying to do as much as you can. I would recommend in January that you have a 15-minute one-on-one meeting with every athlete. Just say, hey, are you okay? Right? School going well, stress levels going well, aches and pains, because we all know, we're all gymnasts probably, or we know, like, if you're not asked, you're probably just going to be like, no, I want to compete. Leave me alone. I just want to be in lineup. So a lot of times athletes won't tell you how things are going. Sometimes you talk to them like, yeah, I feel great. I feel really good. Things are going well. No problems at all. Other times they say something like, I just don't feel awesome, or like, I'm just really tired, or I'm really stressed out, because there's a correlation between testing times and injury risk, and also illness. So keeping those things in mind is really important. I'll pause here and I'll just answer these 2 questions before we get deep in the weeds here. So Jake says, is there a connection or relationship between volume of total training and strength conditioning and relationship of time in the year, the changing of the available practice time as well as competition? So yes, I would say the relationship is going to be, again, how much total time do you have, and what's the room in the bucket, right? Like if you're in off season, you don't want to be going really, really hard on all your strength conditioning and then also going really, really hard on your strength in the same day, or skill work in the same day. So I hope I'm answering your question. Please put in the chat if I'm not, but you would want to make sure you're not going super hard in the weight room and then also doing a lot of floor skills that day, right? You'd want to make sure you're not going really, really hard on their cardio and energy systems and then asking them to go do practice stuff that involves routines that's maybe too aggressive. Bethany says, what do you mean by circuits in this part of the year in season? So circuits in season are typically, most of the time is on routine endurance, right? So just 3-part sled push routines, dance routines, sprint routines, that kind of stuff. Back-to-back bar routines, or like 1 bar routine, then a basics routine after. But I do sometimes do what are called long interval lactate workouts in season to try to continue to maintain some of their intensity. So we'll talk about it next week, but on an offload week where maybe they're not going to compete that weekend, earlier on, we might do 30 seconds of med ball slams, 30 seconds of jump cast handstands on the floor, and 30 seconds of a max effort sled push. It's 90 seconds of work, and they'll be in groups of 3 or more, maybe 4, and the partners will go while that person is working, and then they'll rest. And it just works on that really high intensity. I don't want to go too deep on the rabbit hole, but flooding your body with lactate and just, feeling really, really crappy and huffing and puffing. And then you recover and you try to do lactate clearing exercises, or you do some slow movements or something like that. So that's usually what you're trying to do as well. So yeah, I sometimes will do that. There's short intervals too, where you can do like some very quick twitch 10-second bursts, but essentially you're trying to find ways in season to, again, keep that energy system revving, right? So the way we want to keep the strength levels high and the power levels high, we can also do some interval work, like bike work, that's not going to be pushing on their joints, but they can really work on just go as hard as you can, put yourself in a terrible state. I've done all these workouts with the athletes I've coached, and they're awful. But if you can train your body to know what it feels like to feel crappy, you can then start to feel better when you're doing your last tumbling pass into a pit, for example, in preseason. And then in season, you can start to just learn to tolerate some of that like crappy acidic feeling with your huffing and puffing, and your legs are going to blow up. So we'll go much more deeper into that next week, because I don't want to give people too much overload right now. But yeah, we will do a little bit of that in season. Thoughts on lifting before or after practice, morning versus evening lifts? Great question, Melanie. That depends on the time of season, and it depends on what the effort is. So in the off season, we build the entire program around the 2 lifting days, which is very unpopular opinion for people, but we want to figure out, how can we get them max strength? How can we get them stronger and fitter? So we're going to build the 2 days of the weight training program, and then put the, other things around that. So in that situation, I might want to go on a hard day, lift first, go to the gym, do a lighter workout day. The next day, when they're not lifting, gymnastics first, maybe strength and conditioning at the end with their gymnastic specific stuff. So it staggers. But then when we get into preseason, I'm prioritizing the gymnastics. I want the gymnastics to come along. So the lift might be after, because it's taking a little bit of a less of a backseat. It's still important, but it might be after there. And then in season, it's wherever you can fit it when you have time and the ability. So hope that helps. Ward says, where would you place your weight training during the week in order to get the most out of the weight training without sacrificing the effectiveness of technical gymnastics practice due to soreness and fatigue? Great question. Again, off season, it's the priority, or it's more important. So I would say that's probably going to go in the beginning of the week when they need effort to that. So I might do like a Monday, Thursday split for that, or a Tuesday, Thursday split, because I want them to be fresh. I want them to have the ability to do hard training in a smart way. If you put those training blocks, like I've seen some programs just like scramble together, and it's like Thursday, Friday, or Wednesday, Friday. And you're like, like it's really it starts to become not effective to get you inside of the workout training block. You're like going there and there's like, squats. I can't, it's just the bike is like, like, what are we doing? It just starts to become not as effective. And every strength coach here in the chat will know how tough it is to get an athlete or an athlete group who is on 25% energy and they have to do bike repeats or squats. It's pretty brutal. So yeah, in the off season, I would say front load it in the beginning of the week, whereas maybe preseason it's in the middle. And then, later a little bit, you're going to be probably, and the in season is just kind of wherever you can fit it. Let me finish the slides and then I'll come back and I'll answer more questions because I'll answer them all. I'll literally stay here till 2 a.m. if you guys want, but let me just finish the slides real quick. So March, April, May, right now we're in game mode. You guys are entering this right now. Like, what are your upgrades? Who's the lineup? What's the best performance? Let's get it, man. Let's get the energy level of billion and just compete really well and have an awesome time. So that's peaking season, right? You're just all focused on gymnastics routines. You're focusing on deloading at the right time and the maintenance care stuff comes along and all of your cardio is aimed at gymnastics performance, right? All of your athlete wellness is just stay in one piece. Please God, stay in one piece. Just like who can we work with? Who can we train? How can we keep you competitive? Dealing with injuries obviously always stinks, but sometimes you're embracing the reality and saying, you know what? Unfortunately, we're gonna hang it up. Other people, it's like if we do the right things and we give the right workloads, we can get through and we can have you be competitive. So that is what we're going through right now. Okay, and this is just an example of months and blocks. So say if you're on a 6 week, you might have this first introductory over here. Is you might start by just introducing stuff on week 1. Here are the movements, here are the exercises, here's the strength program. Let's get used to it. Any questions on technique? Who needs the right weight? You're just figuring stuff out. If anyone who knows here, gymnastics coaching or weight training room, the first week of a new program is like herding cats. You're trying to figure out who's going where and what you're doing. So if you go into the first week and like, you know what, we're going to hit it hard. We're going to learn all these things. You're going to be very frustrated when it doesn't go as planned. So I always buffer like a week to just figure it out. Right. And then you would build up a lighter load. The second week, third and fourth week, you're building up even more. Fifth week is really, really intense. And then you pull back in 6 weeks, right? And that's how I program in the summer. We do 4 to 6 week programs for that reason. If you're on a 4-week cycle, that first week, again, you're learning a little bit, but you're trying to get some stimulus in. Second week, you build up more. Third week, you build up more. Fourth week, you deload. And by deload, usually it means reducing the total volume, but trying to maintain the intensity really high. So maybe it's 2 sets or 3 sets of squats instead of 5, right? It's 2 sets of jumps and sprint work instead of a high intensity where it's a little bit lower on the cardio. So deload typically means maintain the intensity, but reduce the volume for me anyways. There's a lot of different ways to go about that. All right. So you look at the out of season example of what that would look like. So maybe on week 1, you're learning and you're loading a little bit. You're doing skills in the gym. You have 2 to 4 days of your strength work, right? 2 of those days in the gym, 2 days of lifting. If you're really strapped for time, 1 and 1, but trying to go 4 days of strength is ideal and 1 kind of prehab or accessory day. Energy systems, you might do 1 to 2 days of circuit work. 1 of those maybe in the gym, 1 of those in the weight room. And then lots of prehab stuff is happening in the summer. And this is for out of season examples, because that's what you guys are going to start with in the summer. Week 2, you just start pushing harder and harder. Week 3, you push harder and harder with these same kind of circuits, but you're just going harder intensity, harder, getting the weight up, getting the intensity up. And then on that 4th week, you just pull back, right? You pull back on maybe the sets and reps and stuff in the weight room, but maybe you're doing a lot more flexibility based work on the intersets. You're doing prehab. You're trying to maintain your main elements of squatting or pushing and pulling and stuff for upper body, but you're not going super hard, and you're trying to just really pull somebody back in the energy systems as well, so that their body, usually energy systems work is their nervous system. It's called their CNS. Just like that's when you just feel like you're dragging yourself around. So you need that week to recover a little bit. Okay. So a couple of caveats here, just a couple more slides. Try to make sure that you're not going super duper hard on Monday. This tends to not be an issue in the college level, because you guys understand this, but at the club level, man, get 2 days off and you come back and you just absolutely crush kids. And sometimes it's really hard. It is not the rest that causes elevated injury risk. It is the rapid increase in load after you say, well, you're fresh, so we should be able to do 5-bar routines, or we should be able to go 500 volts, right? It's that bothers somebody. So take a rolling start to the front of the week. Out of season, not in season. In season is different with getting ready for meets on a Friday, but I almost always have somebody do a lighter workload, basic skills, all that kind of stuff on the first day, and out of season to try to just get their body going back again. And in preseason, it works pretty well too. Usually Tuesday to Friday is the main going hard days for me because of that spike in work and volume and stuff like that. Sorry. So this would just be an example of the week, right? So maybe that first day is light. You would do some basics, flexibility, dance, maybe some skill work too. Obviously, strength might be lighter, easier, pulling back a little bit. You wouldn't do cardio that day, some soft tissue and prep before. But Tuesday, you ramp things up with skills and upgrades. You might do your first day of your gymnastics program, right? And then your circuit, your maybe cardio circuit that you have, we'll talk about next week. Some extra stuff. I'm sorry, that's men's gymnastics, obviously. But you might keep in some active flexibility stuff and dance. And then on Wednesday is the first day you might hit it real hard, right? So you might do your really big workouts on the events. You might do your lifting program that day. You might not do energy systems that day, but prehab. Thursday goes off. Friday, you take another medium day, the second day of your gymnastics program, or maybe your general program, depending on how you want to do it. And then you might have your active recovery dance stuff. And then again, Saturday, if it's the last day, you're probably going to go pretty hard. You put that Friday or that last day as a heavy day, because you're going to have a day off before the weekend comes together. So, and again, that could be Monday through Friday. It's just that happened to be what I was making the program for the college I was working with. And then just obviously an example of what you would do on a tough day or something like that. That should be not Monday. Apologize. That should be one of the later days because Monday we're going lighter. But you warm up, you do your drill circuit, timer, flip 7 vaults. You go over to bars, basics, warm up, 5 in bars, 5 drills, 5 releases, maybe some drills for those releases on top of that. Balance beam, warm up, 5-year series, 5-year turns, 5-year dismounts, and then maybe you're not doing floor that day, and you have these things kind of stacked together for the actual strength or cardio day, whatever you're working on. Here's some examples. Kylie's program from the off season is there for you guys to check out. We put in the entire thing for you. There's some templates and stuff, but Kylie gave me permission to share what her summer program looked like. So this would be her in the weight room with us. So she would do this entire warm up, soft tissue prep, some power work in the beginning here, med ball slams, vertical jumps. We'll talk about that next week. And then this is her main training block. This was her first day training block: goblet squats, some core work, hip lifts, elevated yoga push-ups for some range of motion stuff, some lateral lunges, one-arm dumbbell rows, and then some cuff work because she had some shoulder stuff going on. Her circuit in the gym was just some interval work of bike sprints and med ball slams. Okay, so just an example. Again, we'll break this down pretty in depth next week. But here's another example for her actual gymnastic stuff when she worked. So this was from her, she's an adult, right? She makes her own gymnastics program, and her coach is the one who's helping her out a ton. But you guys all probably know in college, college gymnasts go home and do the majority of what they need, and their coaches give them input. It's not like club where I'm like 5 of these, 5 of these, 5 of these. So she was asking me, what I can work on inside and what, the coach can help build her program with. So this was her, this was her warm up and stuff over here with like core work and stalder work and leg lifts and what my buddy Nick calls the daily dozen. So he has categories of like handstand and rope climb, core work, all that. So the daily dozen is just like what I think is the bare minimum standard. And then handstand work, just some drills, stuff like that on lines on the floor. And then this was her gymnastics specific conditioning for whatever day this was. So some deer jumps, rope climbs, side plank work, roll to candlestick jumps, cast handstands, arch hollow work, some split sliders for eccentrics on that, some shoulder work, and then some compression work as well. So again, she didn't do exactly this. I was giving her advice on what she thought would do well. And obviously she can adjust as she needs. And then this would be an example of an out of season cardio circuit. Ignore all the stuff on the right. That's just really, really geeky stuff that I put in to remember. But 30-second med ball slam, 30-second jumping lunges, and a 30-second handstand walk, 30 seconds of speed V-ups. It's 2 minutes. We're doing this maybe later. So, and then, she'd have either she's on a clock by herself, whatever, how long it takes you to do that, rest 3 times as much because the interval system, you want to make sure you're recovering, or honestly, it should be even more than that, like up to like 7 and 8, but discussion for a different time. But yeah, or she has friends that she works out with too, obviously, so they do it together. But these are horrible. They're one of the hardest things ever, but they're very, very effective to build up some conditioning off season. And then this is just a cheat sheet that you guys can have to work with your strength coaches. They should obviously have a pretty good experience with this, but this is how you break down the upper body to lower body for general type stuff. We'll talk about next week when we break down programming, general core stuff. And then on the right, you have some gymnastic specific stuff that's really important. And then stuff that Nick and I think is, really important for just this stuff should be done every day. This core work, this shoulder work, this handstand stuff that should be done every day. And then some specific examples for, women's over here, active hip flexibility, calf strength, choreography, dance, all that kind of jazz. Nobody needs this. This is just an example of obviously breaking down the actual day of how the events would go and how you would maybe break down the timing. It's usually more at the club level. This is a problem. References, if you're in Geekland like me. And yeah, if you have any questions, I'm going to answer all the questions now, so feel free to stick around. But I hope that was a good start. I know that was massively overwhelming.
Oh, that was great, Dave. Thank you. So yeah, right now there's 4 questions, 1 in the chat, 3 in the Q&A, and I'm sure some more will pop up as we get going here. So
let's get it. And guys, I'm not in any rush. I'll sit here. If you have questions, please ask them. I'm happy to do it. So let's do it.
All right. So let's go with Jake's. I think it's a secondary question to something you were talking about before.
Okay. I'll read it out loud for everybody.
Yep.
So my example is towards the consideration of adjusting from an 8-hour training segments, 4-hour strength and individual gymnastics practice to 20-hour team training weeks with practice and strength conditioning during transitions between the two, and considering the injury risk what are some of the considerations and recommendations you have? Yeah. So this is a good question, right? Going from I think what he means is going from more of a broken down, they're in the summer by themselves, staggered training to like a full training hour week. I think that's what he means. So in this situation, this is where the conversation of workloads comes up. So those of you that are not familiar, calculating a gymnastic specific workload is very challenging because there's no miles to run with GPS. There's no stuff we can do. So that's where you have to have some sort of tracking system for workload, right? So the easiest way to do this is just like a session RPE. How long were you training? Multiply that by how hard was that 0 to 10, and you get a number, which is 1,000. That was 1,000 units of load, right? And you can start to play around with that because you don't want to stack up too fast of a spike in workload too easy. So that's what I would probably do is if the athletes in the summer can just track with a spreadsheet or on their phone or whatever, just say every time you work out, how long did you work out and how hard was it 0 to 10? That's a very rough ballpark estimate for how long were you doing in the summer. And it's individualized to everybody, right? Someone who does 2 events is not going to be in the gym for as long as someone who does 4, right? That's completely different. But I would suggest maybe having a Google spreadsheet that they can track themselves so that you set up for them and just every day they put it in and it just tracks throughout the year or the summer how much load they did. Then when you come back to the preseason, you do the exact same thing. And if you see someone did 2,000 units all summer every day, and then you come back and they get 20,000 units in 1 week, you clearly have spiked quite a bit. But I will say that a huge project that myself and Ellen and many other people are working on with people in this call probably is we're trying to develop a evidence-based gymnastics specific way to track workload. And the way we're doing it is you multiply the events themselves have numbers. So how hard was the warm-up 0 to 10? How hard was vault, bars, beam, floor 0 to 10? How hard was the strength conditioning 0 to 10? Multiply that by how long they're on the event and multiply that by what we call a weighting factor. So as coaches, we know that basics and skills are not as hard as half routines, which are not as hard as full routines, which are not as hard as competing, right? Or those are together. But you multiply by a weighting factor, which the coach prescribes. So say you're on bars for 45 minutes, the athlete rates that a 7, and you're doing routines, you multiply, the time times the RPE times the 3 or 4 weighting factor. That gives you a much more specific unit for that athlete. So that's where we're going. That's my work, my task to tackle, which is trying to get that into the field more. But that's what we need is a specific workload system for gymnastics.
Hey, Dave, I think, not that didn't answer, but I think Jake might have also been referring to, they go from 8 hours to 20 hours with official practice. There's, the CARA rules. So yep. I think it's kind of like a 2-part, there's restrictions to what they can and can't do. I think that might be where Jake was heading.
Yep. Yeah. And so I know obviously there's restrictions on how much time you're with them, but I think that's again where the conditioning is really, really important, right? It's where like the extra, you only have so many hours in the gym you can do. How else can you build capacity or how else can you enhance recovery? That's how you probably reduce the injury risk the most is if you can weight train, if you can do stuff on the side, if they can do some things on their own to stay ready, and then you can have a smoother on ramp. And then also sleep, hydration, nutrition, stress management, that kind of stuff. So you pull up on recovery, pull down on the smoothness of that workload as you go. That's probably the best way to do it. I hope that helps.
All right. You want to hit Lorenzo's question or you want to? Okay.
I'll do that. Earlier in the presentation, you mentioned incorporating sprint work. What is your approach with sprint speed work? Like for gymnastics, i.e. distances, volumes, specific drills, and how might that differ from other sports? Yeah. So it's actually funny. It doesn't differ a ton from other sports because if you want to learn how to sprint really fast and really well, you should probably do the drills and the work that the sprinters are doing, right? That's probably good. So we have a combination of, a couple things. So positions and postures are really important. Unfortunately, a lot of gymnasts don't know how to run well. They don't know where to put their hands at 90-90. They don't know how to get their shins up. They don't know how to move their legs well. So part of our big drills and education is just teaching them, where does my arm go? Where does my leg go when I sprint? And how should I lean? Or where should I be in the first couple steps of acceleration versus when I hit top speed? So a lot of gymnasts don't get those basic educational drills. So a lot of what we'll do early in the summer is just education with my arms go here, my legs go here, wall sprints, fall sprints, not max effort, but positions and postures. And then we build the strength component underneath that, right, for a little while. And then we say, okay, let's get after it. At the end of the summer, we're saying like sprint, sprint, sprint. We do time repeats. We'll do like a max effort 10-meter sprint. We'll look at their time. We'll give them some extra stuff. They'll come back. And we're trying to apply the postures and techniques. We'll give them feedback and talk about technical things, but also as we expose them to more high speed running and strength training and power work, we hope that we get, better better power down the runway or down the turf at our facility. And then also as we train plyometrics and stiffness and bounding and condition their ankles, they get more elasticity throughout the summer. So it's a combination of technical work of teaching the proper way to sprint and then building their strength to power up to they can actually express more force, right? It goes back to the beginning of the lecture. If you get stronger over the summer, you can put more force into the floor, which propels you faster down. And then you have proper recovery of your sprint steps. You're going to harness a lot of that energy and not leak it out. So it's a combination of strength and power work and technical position work, if that helps.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right. Then we got Melanie's.
Substitute for rope climbs if one is not available. Yes. Half kneeling or seated banded pull downs. So just sit, heavy bands overhead, and just do single arm rows down. A lot of people can do that just well. We also do a lot of half kneeling, high point cable rows. So you're in a kneeling position, the pulley is above you, and you're doing the opposite of a landmine press where you're pulling down this way. So it's a really good way to develop single arm lat strength and teres major strength if you don't have a rope.
Awesome. All right. Then we had one from James that kind of scrolled back. So sounds like floor cardio endurance and bar endurance routine can be or should be considered part of their strength and conditioning during season.
Yes, and we'll go into this more in depth next week. But I always take the approach of in the off season doing general aerobic circuits, like circuits you would traditionally do in gymnastics, plus some weight room bike intervals or sled or stuff like that. As you move to the beginning of the preseason, I think it's dangerous and not ideal to go from that summer work to starting to build floor routines or starting to build bar routines. So I always do 4 weeks of transitional anaerobic work. So instead of doing bar routines, we might do, like I said, 30 seconds of med ball slams, jump cast handstands on the floor, and then bear crawls or sled sprints just to get the body used to working really hard for 60 to 90 seconds. We'll do versions of those things, and then we'll transition into like basic sets. So we'll have somebody what we call bardio. So kip cast handstand 5 times, I spot them, they run over to a floor bar, and I'm in club level, so keep in mind the skill level, I'll change it for you guys, but kip cast handstand 5 times, run over, do 10 push-ups on the ground, 10 med ball slams, 3 sprints, they get back in line, and they do that. The rounds go on, they get more tired, but they have to learn how to stay grip strength. For you guys, that might be cast handstand in bar, cast handstand in bar, jump to high bar, giant layout, 10 push-ups, 10 med ball slams, sprint. Like that's transitional work from bike sprints and med ball work kind of to bar work. And then finally it becomes in November or later, you're doing half set, full set, whatever else it is. And then on floor, we might do the similar thing with sled work or bear crawls or some jumping squats and jumping lunges, handstand walks. And then eventually it would become set up into the rod strip, into the pit, do a hard pass backwards, run back, do a hard pass forwards, get on the edge, handstand walk down the floor, walking lunges down the floor, broad jumps down the floor, get back in line, wait for 5 people to go, recover yourself, and then you go again. That builds up the tolerance to, I'm really, really tired and I have to go, but I'm in a safe setting, right? I'm on rod floor, I'm on the foam pit. I'm not going to eat it if I put my full into my head, right? So you can get tired and work on that. And then you eventually make that circuit harder. And then you start doing sled push routines or, sprint routines. Then you water down sets with just layouts or just tucks or whatever else it is. So that's what I usually do. And then in season, it's almost all on the routines, but I might add in 1 day per week of, trying to do some repeat sprint work or trying to do some bike work or stuff like that, because you want to maintain that high amount of output. Sometimes in a bar routine or a floor routine, because it's so technical, you can't go super, super hard and gash yourself out completely. On a bike, you can sell your soul to that thing and you can not get hurt, right? That thing's called Satan's tricycle for a while. I don't mean to make a funny joke, but that's why it's so terrible, because you can go as hard as you possibly want and the chance of you hurting yourself is low. So you can get a really, really high dosage of high intensity work that you probably won't touch in your event work until, you're really, really conditioned. So Lorenzo's follow-up says, would you ever use objective external metrics to monitor workload for the athletes outside of something subjective like internal RPE? Yes. So again, if I had $1 million and I had access to all this, is what we want to do with our studies. Is I only started with the internal workload study of RPEs and split stuff and weighting factors because it was the least expensive and the least technology demanding. So the external workload system that we're hoping to get a grant for and petition for, we're applying for right now, is getting accelerometers from a company that it goes on your shin, and you would wear that and it measures your exact force into the floor and impact volume. It's the best thing we can start with. Impact is definitely the metric we need to start with, although it's complicated with bars and stuff, upper body. But in an ideal setting, if I had $1 million and I could do it all, I would have accelerometer studies on their shins to track their workloads or their impact workloads. I would also have the RPE system of wellness factor, time and session and weighting factor. That would be an internal marker. And then we have wellness stacked on top of that, which is what we're doing now, which is how well did you sleep 0 to 10? How sore are you 0 to 10? What's your energy level 0 to 10? What's your mood 0 to 10? So we would have external workload layered on top of internal workload, layered on top of wellness stuff. And we would get real-time data feedback. And that's what we're seeing now. I think I can actually, I could pull up an example. Let me show this real quick. My screen is not shared right now, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, let me just, I'll get an example of this from the pilot study so people can see where we're going. Yeah, okay. Share screen. You guys can see where we're going because this is coming. This is going to be gold standard for everybody. So this is a pilot data from 2 years ago before we got cut off in COVID, but this is what we're working on. So the weekly training load is the combination of that weighting factor, that, how long you're in the vent. It tracks these things. These are the wellness scores up and down here. And then these are the individual daily loads put together with wellness scores. Composite wellness scores are falling out of line with reliability, so we're not going to do them. But not shown on this is we can break these larger days down, and now the system shows us events. This is a system I've been working on and poured a ton of money into the last 5 years for an engineer to make, but it breaks down that 365 here. It tells you how much of that came from floor, vault, bars, beam, and color codes it. And you can use these numbers to feedback with athletes. So this is literally what I spend 5 hours every Sunday reporting on and writing data for while I watch your meets. So this is where we're going.
That's awesome. I know a lot of other sports use those measuring devices, so it'd be interesting to see what it comes out with gymnastics.
Yeah, we were close. I had the unit that I rented before COVID, and I was checking tumble track versus rod versus floor, and then the world exploded. So,
well, hopefully we get back to some level of normalcy soon enough for you,
Lorenzo. It was IMU. We used IMU for the first what was that? 2 weeks or 4 weeks we could. There's better ones out there that we're going to work with other companies that are less expensive and less clunky. But yeah, that was the one I used back then.
Nice. So you think that's going to be coming mainstream for you guys to use?
I hope so. Right. So that we're in the middle of the study that we have approved with some schools somewhere at some level. I can't say, but we have those approved now. And right now we have an IRB approval to look at wellness scores, workload scores, injury risk. So if an injury occurs, we can backtrack the data and look at that. That's what we have approved right now. And we obviously want to get more. The study is looking a lot at Achilles issues, but it's proof of concept for what we're doing now. And that would then be proof of concept. It goes feasibility, pilot, proof of work, and then real study. So we're in the kind of proof of reliability. We can say, hey, this is a new system that's never been done before. Tim's going to help hopefully input for co-paper that. We get that research paper out, and then people can read that when they look at grants. When we submit grants and say, hey, give us, X amount of money to do this with a couple teams. Can we get some external accelerometers on their shins? Can we get some this and that? They'll fund us the money because they'll look at that paper and say, oh, that's cool. That seems like it could be really, really helpful. And then that goes forward. So yeah, Ellen and I are now working on that. We are submitting a paper for elbow injuries, ACL injuries, and shoulder injuries. I'm writing with a surgeon. And then Ellen and I are trying right now, given the craziness that's happening with Achilles tears, we're submitting grants for tumbling surface engineering study of like vault versus bars versus floor, and like what's the impact on the Achilles of that, so we can give you guys guidance on how to actually get somebody going over the course of 6 weeks, different spring floors, different surfaces, all that kind of crap. And then we're also trying to submit a study for the big one, which is, like I just said, accelerometer, wellness, workload, injury risk scores over the course of a year. And if we got that thing approved, it's going to be so much money, but we could write 13 studies off that and have so much good information for the entire sport. So that's what we're trying.
And you'll be able to provide that to the equipment suppliers and manufacturers to hopefully make whatever necessary adjustments are needed. So
exactly right.
Cool.
Conversation of standardizing floors and how long can you have a floor, and that crazy conversation is floating around. Yeah.
And just a comment in from Joanne, so you can.
Oh, I'm happy to. Yeah. If anybody has questions, feel free to email me. How do you guys have my cell phone number? I try to get back to you as quick as I can. I'm an open book, man. I'm an open book. I'm happy to help. I have massive respect for what you guys all do. And a lot of these people in this call, I have athletes I work with that go to your schools, and I love watching. So I'm your number one fan. So I'm happy to help.
Dave, truly appreciate it. I know, I think myself, with the amount of notes I was taking on your sheets, my head's spinning, and I'm not even an active coach anymore. So I can only imagine how everybody else feels. But a lot of comments coming in, thanking you for the time. So this was recorded.
Yeah, it's recorded, but also the good news is if you have strength coaches and you have medical staff, that does kind of make sense, hopefully. So
there's a lot of strength coaches on this call. So I was very happy to see that. So, a lot of coaches are including them since, let's face it, we rely on them. So
strength coaches, I hope I did you justice and I didn't offend anybody or screw anything up. And if I did, please email me and I'll fix my slides.
All right. So listen, Dave, we're not going to keep you any longer. We truly appreciate it. Tons of thank yous coming in. And like I said, I have this recorded. I'll share it with you and everybody else. And enjoy the rest of your night. Good luck, everyone, this weekend. Dave, thank you so much.